leave his meals at the door. It's been
Whenever you want to jump in, Rabbi Klinger.
Sounds like someone's got COVID, huh?
Yeah, Gene.
How's he doing?
Thanks. Not great.
Gene's a great patient.
No, he usually is not kvetchy. So when he's not feeling well,
Right.
leave his meals. You know it. There's definitely something wrong.
Whenever you want to jump in, Rabbi Klinger.
Sorry. I got echo here. Okay. All right. So, hope he feels better soon. And
Thank you. And apologies in advance. I have a workman coming sometime between 8 and 9, so I might have to get.
All right, no worries. So we're gonna continue now with Rishon and Zion. We're going to begin. We're going to restart Sif Dalid. Sif Gimel was all about what is and is not a davar hamosif hevel. I think we covered that one pretty thoroughly. And we mentioned the case in Sif Dalid last time, but we didn't really go into the Mishnah Berurah's comments. So let's just reread Dalid. So jog our memory as to where we were. So AFLP. So on mine here, it's this sheet is it says page Kufchet Amud Bet, 2 dots, and then we're on the second line. Okay. So AFLP she'ein tomnin b'Shabbos, even though we do not do hatmana on Shabbos, afilu b'davar she'ein mosif hevel, even if it's something which does not increase heat. Im taman bo mi ba'ojom, if you do hatmana mi ba'ojom, meaning before Shabbos starts, so it's Friday afternoon, v'nisgala misha chashecha, and then it becomes uncovered after Shabbos. So it was in a situation of hatmana, and for hatmana b'davar hamosif hevel is not allowed erev Shabbos into Shabbos, but if it's davar she'ein mosif hevel, you are allowed to do that hatmana from erev Shabbos into Shabbos. Right, so if you want to wrap your pot that now you don't have space for it because you're heating other things up, and you want to keep your pot hot, you wrap it in a sheet in an attempt to preserve the heat. You're allowed to do that from erev Shabbos into Shabbos. Again, as we said, on Shabbos you're not allowed to do that as a gzeira. It's a rabbinic decree because you might come to do it in a hamosif hevel, and then you might come to stoke the cold, etc.
What if it is on the heat source and you cover it up?
Then that's a davar hamosif hevel.
Before Shabbos, it's
if it's on a heat source, then we consider davar hamosif hevel. Yeah.
So can you leave it into Shabbat? That's the question.
If it's davar she'ein mosif hevel. If it's let's say just a sheet, just a plain sheet, not on top of a heat source, then it's okay. That way you're allowed to preserve heat. So it says here, so if it gets uncovered after Shabbos starts. So now you have a davar she'ein mosif hevel. Maybe it was your dog, it was your cat who unwrapped the thing in an attempt to look for, I don't know, or it was your child or whatever. Mutar lachazar v'lachasoso. You can then you can recover it. They came into Shabbos appropriately covered. You can recover it, no problem. Now, this is where it gets even more interesting. So let's say you have one sheet around this pot, and you really want to preserve the heat. So what do? You go to your linen closet, you find a down blanket, and you wrap the pot in it has the sheet on it, and it has now you put the down blanket on top of around that in an attempt to preserve the heat of this very piping hot chicken soup. And by the way, that probably would be an effective thing at keeping it at its temperature, putting a down blanket. So you're allowed to do that. Take a look here. Let's just pause for a moment and go to Chaf Hey in the Mishnah Berurah. V'nizgala misha chashecha. Masha kosad v'nizgala. That it became revealed. It's a reflexive, right? It became revealed. Sounds like you didn't do it on purpose. Lav dafka. Mishnah Berurah says doesn't have to be that kind of case. It's not specifically, it became uncovered on its own. You can go ahead and purposefully uncover this thing, not a problem at all, and then recover it. Kemoshe Kosov B'Samach, as we will see shortly in the next line of the Shulchan Aruch. Elo the Kamash Malan. So what are we learning from this language of Vinis Gala? This, it became uncovered. It teaches us the Afachi Gavna, even in a case where it happened by accident. Shinizgala Mimela, it uncovered itself. It became uncovered, certainly was not done with any thought. Dafka Mishachashecha, specifically from when it becomes dark, then you can recover it. Let's say by itself it became uncovered Erev Shabbos, and I failed to, recover it before Shabbos starts. Also, lechasoso b'Shabbos. I'm not allowed to, in that case, recover it on Shabbos. The havele kemat min lechatchila b'Shabbos, because it's like doing hatmana anew on Shabbos, and therefore you don't get a heter saying, well, it was by accident 30 minutes before Shabbos this thing fell off. Again, my dog did it, my cat did it, whatever. I didn't realize it, so you don't get the opportunity to recover it. Certainly, if you uncover it biyadayim with your hands, purposefully on erev Shabbos, with the idea I'll recover this on Shabbos for whatever heating calculation you're making in that moment. That's the right calculation. You're like, I'm uncovering it now 15 minutes before Shabbos, and I'm going to cover it again 5 minutes into Shabbos, because that's the perfect temperature to serve whatever, fill in the blank, food. The asr lechasoso b'Shabbos. You're not allowed to do that because it is prohibited to do hatmana on Shabbos. You're not allowed to cover things on Shabbos anew.
So the idea is that when you get to Shabbos, you open it, you use your pot, whatever is in there.
And then you can put it back.
You can put it back, but you cannot cover it.
No, so if you
now you actually use the item, you use the stuff because you uncover it and then you make an atmana. That's like if you do it again, if you.
I'm going to go with no here. I'm going to say actually you can recover it. We'll see when we get to the end of Sif Daled, we'll see that you can transfer it from one pot to another pot and then cover the second pot.
Isn't that atmana? Because it was
Yes, but the gezerah, so the classic rabbis, when they make a gezerah, they also make the rules of the gezerah. So they can build in the exceptions to it, which is the exception here is that if you do properly cover it going into Shabbos, so then you are allowed, you're allowed to recover it, and that's even if, let's say, you took some of the food out, some of the soup out, and now you want to. By the way, with a soup, I have actually seen people do that. Sometimes they put a towel, not all the way around. In order for it to be hatman, it has to be all the way around. But I've seen people put a towel on top of the soup pot. I think in an attempt to not just be able to pick up the handle more easily, because it makes it easier to pick up the handle, but that it preserves the heat a little bit. I've never seen it where the towel was wrapped around the whole thing, so it's not hatmana in that situation. So that would be perfectly fine to do it. But yeah, we'll see here in a moment, Shlomo, that even if you move the food around, you're going to be able to recover it. Okay, let's go back to the next sentence in the Shulchan Aruch. V'cheinim rotzen, and we're kind of stopping here piecemeal. We're going to give more heterim as we go along here. Usually it works the other way in halacha. There's more as you go along. You learn about every one of the things you were not allowed to do, and now you can't do this either because maybe this will happen. Here we have the opposite happening. V'cheinim rotzen litlo kulo v'lases acher b'mkomo. Let's say, if you want to, let's say, take the cover. So you have let's say it's like the Seinfeld episode where Kramer heats up everything in the oven, including like his shirt and whatever. So let's say you have hot sheets. And so the one that you have right now is cold. And the other one, so before Shabbos, you covered it in a certain situation with a sheet. And now there's another sheet, and this sheet was sitting on top of the radiator, and now it's warm. It's a little warmer. So you want to transfer the soup pot from this one to that one. The answer is yes, no problem. It's perfectly permissible. Whether the first one was hotter than the second one, or the second situation is hotter than the first one, all fine. You can switch the actual cover. So it's not to be the same cover which you put back on after it becomes uncovered. And he says here, Afilu lo haya mechusa ela besadin. And let's say the first one was just a sheet, right? A sheet is very thin; it doesn't really retain much heat. So yochol litlo v'lechasoso beglufkarin. You can take it out of its sheet and put it into glufkarin, which is like a woolen. It's like a heavy woolen garment. Yeah, it's made of wool. So you can imagine it's like it's the difference between a sheet and a down blanket, essentially, right? You're now covering with something that's a more effective insulator. So you're allowed to do that. You're allowed to change it as long as coming into Shabbos, it had some sort of kisui. It had some sort of. It was in a hatmana situation.
So this before Shabbat starts.
The second part is after Shabbos starts. I mean, it has to be properly hatmanad, for lack of a better word, before Shabbos starts. And then on Shabbos, you can move it around to another hatmana situation that's more effective, insulator, such as the glufker in the woolen, the heavy woolen clothing. Okay, let's look at Chavav, and then we'll go back upstairs again. So Chavav in the Mishnah Berurah, Filo v'chulei v'sadin, Rod Selomar Delo Tema Tezeh Eine Chashuvat Hatmana. Don't say that when it's in a sheet. I mean, a sheet. Come on, what is it really retaining? Nothing. It's as thin as paper. So it's not really Hatmana. No, you can't say that. She'enomo. Don't say it doesn't help. It does help. And don't say that, if you take it from a sheet and you put it into a glufkarin, the woolen clothing, heavy woolen clothing, that suddenly it's like hatmana lechatchila, it's like a new hatmana. No, we don't say that. Kamash Malan, what do we learn? The af sadin, even a sheet, moil alcohol panim b'miktas. It does help with some insulation minimally, and therefore once you have some minimal insulation help, then you can move things on Shabbos to a situation where the insulation is much more effective. Okay.
I assume this is a situation where even you're saying it has to be fully cooked. But if it's fully cooked, but tastes better the longer it's cooked, that's okay too. Because in the past we've talked about things that where the taste improves when it's cooked.
Right. So perhaps not. We're going to see in a moment. We'll see in a moment. And it's a little bit of a source of machloket. But the end of Dal talks exactly about what you're going to say. So we're about to read that part now, actually. So let's pick up where Steve's question leaves off. Next sentence here in the Shulchan Aruch. V'hushin is bashla hakadera kol tzorka. As long as this is all okay, as long as everything in the pot was fully cooked. Aval im eina mevushelas kol tzorka. If it's not fully cooked, afil lahosif al hakisui aser. Even to add a covering would be prohibited. Shetosef ezeh, because this addition gorem la lehisbashel is causing this food in the pot to cook. Now,
I'm sorry, where are you?
I went back upstairs to the Shulchan Aruch. So basically, if it's fully cooked, great. All these kulas, all these heterim exist. But if it's not fully cooked, to even add one kisui, one covering, is a problem because it causes it to cook. Now, look at the Mishnah Berurah. This is a great Mishnah Berurah. What does he say? Gorem la chav zayin ayin bever halacha. So I'm not writing it again. Go look where I wrote over there, in the Be'er Halacha on the other side. It's too lazy. I doesn't want to write it again. I'm just kidding. It's not lazy. He wrote it, and he says you gotta take a look at this. Because what's wrong with what the Shulchan Aruch just said from a scientific perspective? If you have a davar she'eino mosif hevel, and you are preserving the heat, and then you add another cover to it, what is a problem with what I just said right now in terms of it gorem la lehisbashel, that it causes it to cook? What's the problem? It doesn't. It doesn't. How could that? It doesn't make any sense. If you have food at the current temperature that it's at, you remove it from it. There's no heat source here. You envelop it. You insulate it in let's say in a down blanket, and then you take another down blanket on Shabbos, and then you cover with another down blanket. It's not going to cook. That makes no sense whatsoever. From a scientific, that doesn't make any sense. So,
depends on how you define cooking.
True, but even if What do you mean by that, Steve?
If I have a meat sauce, it tastes better the longer it's cooked.
Right.
So a dog will eat it now, but I'm going to let it cook more, and I'm going to let it warm, stay in the pot more, and it's going to taste better in an hour.
Even though there's no new heat that's increasing that.
Correct.
Right. Interesting that Steve said that. What Steve says is the opinion of actually some of the Achronim. So Shkoyach Steve, Baruch Shekivanta, who try to explain this line in the Shulchan Aruch. They're going to basically say what Steve just said. There are many other Achronim who think that this doesn't make any sense, because it just doesn't make any sense. I feel like even with what Steve is saying, there are people who that doesn't make any sense still, because at the end of the day, you're not really adding heat. Steve is saying it's kind of stewing in its own heat. That's what he's saying. So if you look at the Be'er Halacha, I don't want to read every word here. It's not short, but we'll read a little bit. Everyone see where it is? It's right to the right-hand side. Dibur hamaschil gorem lalihiz basha. Okay, so the Be'er Halacha here says, he quotes the Magen Avraham, Kasav Magen Avraham, Keshetmuna bedavar she'en mosif hevel. If it's which is the only permissible situation. There's hatmana in something that does not increase heat. Pashut she'eno gorem bishul klal. The Magen Avraham disagrees with Steve's logic and says, Pashut, you can't cook. That doesn't make any sense. Ela mayri b'derech shekosav v'sivches. It's like when we get to sivches, you'll see that what he's writing is kind of in the spirit of that. What's happening here? It's enveloped in a sheet, for lack of a better way of saying it, and it's on top of a kira. So there's a heat source that's pumping heat into the davar she'eino mosif hevel situation, which essentially, for all intents and purposes, is a davar shemosif hevel now. But then he's saying it's al gabe kira sheyesh tachtea gechalim. There are coals there.
That's mosif hevel. They lost the definition.
Right, exactly. And they're gechalim ketumim. Of course, it's ketuma here. It's a group of ketumim. Remember from ketumim as when you cover the coals with ashes. The ilav hachi aser lahamid sham. Obviously, if it wasn't the case and it's not fully cooked, and you don't have proof of ketuma, so you can't put it there, according to the Mechaber's opinion. The Ramah says if it's kamachal ben drusai, you could do this. Okay, let's leave that aside. Okay, this is what we said, as I mentioned a moment ago. Ulamala, and above it, so they have this kira, and on top of it, ulamala it's covered in clothing. This pot, in a way where it's not touching the kedera. So you have some, and we'll get to sifches not today, but it's touching in a way that's not touching. And as we've talked about before, and we'll get when we get to Sif Ches, you'll see this more explicitly. Sorry, I turned the page the wrong way for a second. But when you get to Sif Ches, if it's not touching, so then you're allowed to do hatmana like this. So if you create a little bit of a gap, it's okay. As I told you, the people who feel that the crock pot situation is a problem for hatmana reasons, because the heating element envelops the crock pot, and the cover of the crock pot is the cover of the crock pot, and thus making it to hatmana. What they do is they put little aluminum foil balls at the bottom, so it's not sitting directly on the heating element. You create some avir, some space between the pot and the source, the heat source. But I told you, just to be clear, again, I don't think that's hatmana. Nor was that I was not taught that that's hatmana, but there are rabbeim out there who think that that's hatmana. So that's why you'll see some people do it. It doesn't make sense. A pot cover is part of the pot. Okay. That's when, if it's in this situation where it's not a full hatmana, but it's a kind of hatmana, where it's otherwise permissible, but if it's not fully cooked and I add another down blanket on top, this may this will cause it to, it's just not fully cooking. So it's not it increases the intensity of the heat in that space, because there already is a heat source, and now by retaining the heat even better in this area, in this space, it will cause the bishul to happen quicker. Okay, that is how the Magen Avraham tries to explain this line in the Shulchan Aruch. The other explanation, which is more in line with what Steve said, He says, "If a sefer base mayor cholik alav," the base mayor says disagrees because of the pashtius hatur v'hashulchan aruch. The simple way of understanding the Torah and the Shulchan Aruch is mashma the mayor b'chol gavnei. All situations. Shulchan Aruch didn't differentiate here. Didn't specify what case is all across the board here. And basically, if you look here, we'll skip a little bit down the line. Because of the sefer base mayor, what's the reason? Let's say you take a hot soup off the stovetop, you then put it into a blanket, and so it's kind of boiling. So if you then add more, blankets, put one blanket, then a minute before Shabbos you put it into a blanket. A minute after Shabbos starts, then you put another down blanket on top of the soup. So he says here, it will omed biritichaso. It will kind of continue to be at its current heat, its current boil, umizbashal, and it will kind of cook, as Steve has said before, in its own heat. Af shamat mi b'davar she'ein mosel, even though it's a blanket. Ela ma'amida b'chamimuso uritichaso, but it's maintaining its heat and its boiling level, and therefore it is able to cook a little bit further. And again, that's a problem if you're causing it to cook.
But I don't understand the first point that you made.
Yes, go ahead.
How do you get this atmana, and how do you make it cook?
So it's because why? It's sitting on top of a kira. Kira is an oven, basically. So the pot's over top of it. And imagine you build like a tent over top of this. It's not fully turned, but there's a tent over top of it. Assuming there's no fire hazards here. And then what do? You take a down blanket on top of that, and you're going to add more. So it's kind of a davar she'ein mosif hevel in some ways, because it's not really hatmana, really. That's the key. It's really not hatmana. It looks a little bit like hatmana, but hatmana means you really envelop it on all four sides. Here, you've created some sort of gap between the blanket on top and the pot. Underneath, you have the oven. If it's a perfectly permissible shahiyah situation, right, where I'm allowed to put it on there because I ensured that the coals were raked out or to the side or covered in ashes, so I set that up perfectly, and then I set up a situation where I kind of help the heat retain more intensely. So according to this first opinion, that causes the bishul to happen.
I thought you're not supposed to put it on this.
But that's only if it's hatmana. That's when the pot is enveloped. If it's not enveloped, so now we fall back on the laws of shahiyah, right? This idea of how do we heat up food from Erev Shabbos into Shabbos. You're allowed to actually, according to Ashkenazim. I don't know what the Sfaradim, by the way. The Sfaradim, the Mechaber is not so clear that he paskins like. It's clear what the Rama paskins like. The Rama paskins like the second opinion that if it's even a third or a half cooked item, and it's going into Shabbos on this heat source, and the heat source, no problem. By the way, that would mean if you have a stovetop on, right? The burner is on. I don't know how you're going to turn it off, and I'm not here suggesting you should leave a burner on for 25 hours. So that's because you can't even adjust the heat, right? It's one thing if you can maybe turn it down, but you have the food is half cooked, and you want it to fully cook. So you're allowed to leave it there because you don't need grufa or ketuma. You don't need to rake the coals, whatever. Once it's half cooked, you could actually technically leave it there. And when it's done, take it off and serve it to everybody. Now, what are you going to do with the fire? I don't know what you're going to do with the fire. That's a different problem. But you could do that. So that's something to, that's a separate halacha as we've talked about, but because it's not really hatmana. But it looks like hatmana, and that's what he's talking about here. The pshat is like really what Steve said, in terms of the text. But the science would lead you to believe that the first explanation of the Magen Avraham is correct. No, what can I tell you? That's you pick which one you want to follow. I'm not sure here that many of us are going to come into a practical situation where there'll be a true nafkamina, a true practical difference about whose opinion you follow here. So perhaps I don't know. Maybe it does matter. I don't know.
We've talked before about you can't cook something that's cooked. Once it's cooked, a dog could eat it, and so on. It's cooked.
Right. Ein bishul achar bishul.
Right. So now we're talking about continuing to cook, and potentially problematic situation of continuing to cook. How do you reconcile those two? And in the past, you have differentiated where the taste improves when you continue to cook. So if the taste improves, it was already cooked. What's the difference?
Yeah, so I think I don't know. It's interesting here. He mentions only the case of it's not fully cooked.
Is there a difference between soup and non?
Sure, that's exactly the difference between stomach v'yafelo, the continuation of its drying out improves the taste, and stomach v'ralo, where a grilled chicken, for example, if you heat it up and you dry it out even more, it's not as still be good, but it's not as good as if it's juicy. It's interesting here, Steve, that he does not make the double mention that he does in other situations where it's not fully cooked, or it's fully cooked but it's stomach v'yafelo. Here he doesn't go there. I wonder if because mida oraisa, once it's cooked, probably you can't violate Torah law once it's cooked, even if the furthering of it enhances the flavor, and that is a rabbinic decree where by Shehiyah where that's mentioned. I wonder if here the answer would be, well, here we're not machmir about that because we're already dealing with a din d'Rabbanan, and here it's again, the science is they weren't thinking in science terms maybe, but they were rational. They would think rationally about is it increasing or decreasing. Maybe here that there was no incentive, or there's no interest in extending that gezerah to the situation you're talking about, which is the continuation of something that's fully cooked. It is the first time that it comes to mind, though, where that is differentiated. So everyone understands what Steve's point is, that usually those two cases go together. When it's fully cooked and continues the continuation of its cooking, it's stomach v'yafelo, it's good for its flavor, and not cooked are usually lumped into one category when we talk about shehiyah and chazara. But here there's no mentioning of the second case of the. I don't know. Somehow either the understanding is in hachinami that is the case, but it just didn't mention it here, or no, we don't mention that case here because there's no. It's enough that we made a gzera on the not cooked because that's causing real doraisa bishul, and let's not go there. When it comes to dindra, that's why my sense is that's what's happening here. Because if you look, this is a throwaway line. This is like, oh, you could do all these things, just be sure that you don't end up violating the oraisa of cooking. So maybe that's the difference here, as I'm talking it out in my head right now. That here we're like, just make sure you don't violate the biblical prohibition. As long as you don't do that, you have all these other heterim at your disposal. Okay. And maybe that doesn't. Maybe the continuation of cooking is not a deoraisa. And I would argue it's not a deoraisa. Once it's fully cooked, there's no more creative work at that point, or creative labor where you're creating something new. Enhancing a flavor is different than creating something new, a different product, which is essentially what you're doing when you're cooking from raw to cooked. It's a good point, though. Really excellent, sharp point that you picked up on the difference here between those two. And I appreciate that you forced me to certainly think that through. Okay, let's go to Sifhei. Impina hatafshil b'Shabbos mikadera shenizbasha v'alakadera acheres. This is why Shlomo, your case before, I said no. I think you're allowed to do hatamana from one. If you look at this case, if you empty the contents of one pot on Shabbos and you empty it into another pot. Presumably, by the way, the first pot was in a situation of hatmana, but davar she'ein mosif. He doesn't say that, but that's pretty obvious here. So you are allowed to do hatmana and davar she'ein mosif in the second pot. Same foods, different pot, permissible. I don't see why, if you take some of the contents of that pot on its way to the second pot, that suddenly the halacha should change that you can't do hatmana on the second pot. I assume that's permissible. Chavchet in the Mishnah Berurah, im pina b'chulei, the lo asur ela kashu b'kli rishon shenizba shalom. It is only prohibited to do hatmana. Now here comes another kula. You're only prohibited to do hatmana if it's in the kli rishon, where it was cooked. Okay, so the kli rishon, that was the pot in which the soup was cooking. That's the pot in which the cholent was stewing. That's the pot where That's in the pot where it happened, to sort of quote a little bit from the Hamilton play of In the Room Where It Happened. In the pot where it happened, the cooking, that's where the problem of hatmana could be. If you empty it to a second pot, even if it's still piping hot, you take a soup and you pour from one pot to another pot, it's not suddenly going to be room temperature. So it's still mutter to do hatmana in the second situation.
But I thought the issue is because it was hatmana before Shabbat.
Yeah. So let me actually. So let me back up. I stand corrected here. Confusing my faces here. Here, actually, we're talking about a kli rishon, no hatmana. I apologize. There is no hatmana. I'm confusing it with a different case, which we'll get to. But if you have a pot, soup was cooked in this pot, kli rishon. You take the pot and then you put it. Let's say you don't even remove all the contents, but let's say you pour it into a smaller pot. Some of the soup. You're allowed to in this because it's called halachically a kli sheni now. It's a second vessel. The cooking did not take place here. Therefore, and cooking cannot take place in a kli sheni. You can't cook something in a kli sheni. So let's say you took in this soup, and let's say you dropped into the soup a carrot. The carrot will heat up. It will even change some of its, maybe much softer. Nonetheless, we do say that that's not called cooking. Halachically, that's not called cooking. Right? We'll talk about when we get to this whole sugya, tea, coffee, maybe exceptions to this, because those are called kalei habishol, because they cook with great ease, unlike a carrot for a little leaf that's the size of my fingernail, and has the volume of my fingernail in terms of how that will cook with great ease. And so the Gemara talks about such items can cook in a kli sheni. But let's say use a carrot or an onion, right? These things will not so easily cook, and so therefore we split. They won't cook from a halachic perspective, even if they do soften, they do change a little bit. So again, the case here is that I move things to a cliche, and now I want to keep things warm in the cliche. I'm allowed to do hatmana, even though the soup in the cliche is quite hot. So I'm allowed to do hatmana again, but davar she'eno mosif hevel. Davar mosif hevel is always.
The first kli had already we did hatmana before.
No. Again, no hatmana on the first kli. It was cooked. Let's say it was Friday night, and the soup was cooked in a pot, and it was on the fire. I take it off the fire 1 minute after Shabbos starts. I pour the contents into something else, and I want to insulate the soup as much as I can so that when everyone gets home from shul, it's as warm and as hot as can be. Okay, this is the situation. I'm allowed to do that, Hatman. Okay, that's permissible. So back in the Shulchan Aruch, as our Mishnah Berurah, he explains more why. Now let's say I take it from the Kli Sheni and I pour it back to the Kli Rishon, right where it cooked. Let's say I empty the first pot completely, goes into the second pot back into the first pot. That's a non-mishari. That's also permissible. Yes, because why? We'll see in a moment. The two lo mikri Kli Rishon, because that's not called Kli Rishon anymore. You cooked it in there, but this is like what people do with this made-up category called Kli Shlishi. Sorry, I have an allergy to Kli Shlishi. Okay, you take what do people do, right? Because they want to make their tea, in a Kli Shlishi, right? They want to avoid the whole thing. So what do? You take you go to your thermos, which has the boiling hot water, and you push, down on the thing, whatever on the. So I don't know what they call it, the pump. It pumps the water out. The thermos is undoubtedly the Kli Rishon. Goes into your cup. That's a Kli Sheni. Then what do people do? They take that and they pour it into something else, or they'll put the water from the thermos into a teapot, and then people will pour from the teapot. And so now you're in a Kli Shlishi, or you get the third one. There's no difference. You can take you could take it and pour it back into a Kli Rishon. That doesn't make sense in my example, but like the Kli Rishon is no longer a Kli Rishon once its contents have left the pot. So he's saying here, you could go back and put it back in the Kli Rishon. What do I care? What makes something a Kli Rishon? Right? He'll talk about it in a second. The Tula Mikri Rishon, have like it's on in the Mutter Latmina because it's cooled down enough that now it's Mutter to do Atmana in the Kli Rishon once you've removed it and then put it back in. Why Vafila B'Kli Rishon in Miskarer? Even if it cooled down, Vafila B'Kli Rishon. Sorry, so let me explain. He doesn't explain here. What's the thought process behind this? That what makes a Kli Rishon is not that just the contents are hot, but the walls of the pot are very hot. So when you pour it into a Kli Sheni, the walls of the pot are room temperature. They're cold. If it's metal, it's certainly it's cold. So even though the contents are hot, it's not doesn't have the same ability and the intensity to cook. Once you remove the contents from the first pot into the second pot, and you replace it back in the third into the first pot, the walls will have cooled down somewhat. Now I admit that our pots today, and I can't speak for them, our pots today are really effective. Don't try it. You made a soup, you pour the soup out, you come back 3 minutes later, you'll still burn your hand on the outside of the pot that had the soup on it. So, in the pots of the days of Chazal, I don't know how effective they were, at retaining heat the way that ours are. But in theory, in practice, there is some cooling down that does take place, undoubtedly. But if you take out the boiling hot contents, the walls will cool down, the pot will cool down faster. They may not cool down so quick that you could touch it yet, but this is the theory, that if you don't have it in a Kli Rishon in which it was cooked, then it's no longer considered Kli Rishon for halachic purposes.
But it doesn't make sense to do that. Somebody wants to keep the food heat hot. You take it out from the Kli Rishon, and put it back in the Kli Rishon so you can cover it and keep the heat. You already lost.
Yeah,
80%.
it's not practical. I agree.
What was that comment?
Shlomo is saying that it's not practical. If you have a Kli Rishon and you want to do Hatmana, it's more effective to just move it from Kli Rishon to Kli Sheni and do Hatmana. You're going to lose more heat along the way of transferring things from 1 to 2 and then 2 to 1 than if you just keep it in 2 and you do Hatmana there. Right.
What's the quantity amount that?
Yeah, that's also a question. Maybe it's
I can take a small cup.
Go,
and just,
right, you can go back and
no
forth.
effect.
Right.
Is there a limit on the quantity anywhere?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, people when they do the Kli Rishon trick, the Kli Shlishi trick, they go 1, 2, 3. It's like it's not but they don't pour it back into the first one.
No, but I'm pouring back into the first one. Let's say I took out a small cup, and then if I put it back into Kli Rishon.
Right.
Now the Kli Rishon is like a Kli Sheni, but
it's a little hotter than the Kli.
But I only took a little bit out. I mean, how much?
Oh, you have to remove the whole thing on the first one.
You have to remove.
Yeah, that's why pina. Pina means to empty. If you empty the top shell out of the first pot, so now it's empty.
Okay.
Nothing is left. No contents are left.
What's the purpose of doing the tea on one cup to the other cup and bring it back to the first cup?
Oh, for like making tea? That's the whole sugya. We'll get to that. We will cover that in Hilchot Shabbat. Al rega lachas. The reason is because there's this idea that a Kli Shlishi, Kli Sheni can still cook things. According to the Gemara, if it's kalei habishul, it cooks with great ease, very like a tea leaf, very tiny. It's easy. I can fully cook it with even the intensity of a Kli Sheni. So people say, "Oh, move it to a Kli Shlishi," and then it won't cook. So you move the water there, and you put the tea bag in, and now it's fine. The problem with it, as the Mishnah Berurah and the Aruch HaShulchan point out, the problem is, they point out why it's a problem with looking at Kli Sheni. Sorry. Why is the problem with the Kli Shlishi? Is that it's a made-up category. My Rebbe is, I'm a little harif on this because he was. It's a made-up category. The Gemara never talks about Kli Shlishi. In fact, Rabbi Weider is always one to look at the Gemara, the Talmud. His derech halimud was always, if you have a sugya, if we're learning for halachic purposes. Let's say we were learning just one year we did Yevamos in this year. So we would always start with what the sugya in the Yerushalmi was first before we looked at the sugya in the Bavli. So if you look in the Yerushalmi about the topic of Kli Sheni, Kli Rishon, Kli Sheni, Kli Rishon is defined as the pot in which the food was cooked, where the fire was on, was underneath, was on top of the fire. Kli Sheni is not a Kli Rishon. That's what it is. It's basically anything that's not on the fire. By that definition, all pots, you could take a cup and go to the Kli, then put it into Kli Sheni, and then put it into another thing and call it Kli Shlishi, but it's really Kli Sheni. It doesn't change. I mean, Kli Shlishi is not, the definition of Kli Sheni is that it's not a Kli Rishon. And therefore, any subsequent cup that you pour the water into is just a Kli Sheni. This is his derech, So therefore, so that's why if I won't. One of the chumras I don't impose on other people, not on my family.
But the moment you
Yeah.
put the water, tea back in the first Kli Rishon.
In a Kli Rishon, it's
You cook the tea. Once you try to transfer it back and forth, it's really cooked already in the first.
for sure. If you're not allowed to put a tea bag in a Kli Rishon. So let's say you open up the thermos and you dump a tea bag in there. No, absolutely not. You cannot cook
I'm
the.
saying Kli Rishon cup, first cup.
So that's called a Kli Sheni.
Cliche.
Kli Rishon is defined as where something was cooked. So in the case of the hot water, it's in the it's the electric, the thermos. Right? That's the Kli Rishon. It boils that water. When you pour it into a cup, that's a Kli Sheni. The big question is, can I cook? And everyone always says it's fine. I admit that I am more stringent than most people on this question. That most people say once you transfer to a Kli Shlishi, no problem. Stick the tea bag in, you have nothing to worry about. For a Kli Shlishi. Kli Sheni, the Mishnah Berurah and the Aruch HaShulchan are not fans of this idea. They believe that they say explicitly tea and coffee are kalei habeshul, and therefore you can't just move, take your hot water and then stick. Now, I will say, Reb Soloveitchik was a frum Jew, by the way, in case you didn't know. Reb Soloveitchik did have tea in a Kli Sheni. Okay? And when we get to that whole sugya, we'll explain why he felt that was okay. We'll explain the Mishnah Berurah and the Aruch HaShulchan were not comfortable with that, and we'll explain where the Kli Shlishi comes from. And again, at that point I'll go into more depth about. I'll show you that Yerushalmi where would throw into question what the definition of that a Kli Shlishi is any kind of halachic category, because that's not the definition that's used in the Talmud Yerushalmi. It doesn't appear in the Bavli, but there's no reason to think that the same definition shouldn't apply to the Bavli. They just never mention the definition.
So the way they do it, they pour the water Kli Sheni, then they put it in Kli Shlishi, and then put it back in the Kli Sheni with a tea bag.
Then you could do that. That wouldn't be called Kli Shlishi. That wouldn't be called Kli Sheni anymore. Because every time you move the contents, it's Kli. It's the next number. That would be like a Kli Ravi, right?
Because of Mishnah Berurah and the others, we were not familiar with something like an instant coffee, which is already cooked. So it's
Right. So that may change things. Like instant coffee is a game changer.
Same thing with the tea.
Right, because that's basically already roasted. The instant coffee is already roasted. That's a game changer, 100%. It's if you want to take fresh grounds, and you can cook fresh coffee grounds. Okay, you can. This is you said you're who do you have in Teaneck who goes to Shear? Is that somebody? Sorry, Weeder Shear? No. Oh, it's not you. Somebody or is it did your Nachatan go to the Shear? So he'll tell you, he goes to Shir, he has a Shir every Shabbos morning. He does like a Gemara Shir thing. So you go to his Shir, he puts out fresh coffee, he makes fresh coffee. He doesn't drink it himself, he doesn't drink coffee, but he makes fresh coffee with a Melito, what's it called? Filter. So if you put the coffee grounds at the bottom of the Melito filter, you pour hot water through it. It actually is an explicit Mishnah, doesn't use coffee grounds, it uses grape sediment. That is permissible on Shabbos. And therefore, you can have fresh coffee, not instant coffee. Reader wasn't a coffee drinker; his wife was, but he said his wife reported that instant coffee, lav shmei coffee. Apparently, instant coffee is not called coffee. That's not. It's not the same. I'm not a coffee drinker really myself either, so I can't really weigh in on this discussion. But if you really want fresh coffee, there is a way with fresh coffee grounds. You can do it in a halachically permissible way, and they don't have to have only instant coffee. Instant coffee certainly makes it easier halachically because of the whole issue of because you have the ein bishlach arbishal thing working for you.
Well, even regular coffee is roasted.
What was that?
Even regular coffee it's roasted.
The beans are roasted?
All coffee, yeah, of course.
Fully roasted?
Yeah, they're all roasted.
All roasted.
Yeah.
Okay. There you
They're
go.
not raw, they're not raw
I'm
beans.
holding in coffee, so you guys will help me through the simon about coffee.
You can't do it on Shabbat because the machine is.
The machine problem is a problem. That's why if you use a filter, you do it by hand. You take hot water and you pour it through this filter with the coffee grounds at the bottom of the filter. You're holding it and you pour it through, then you can have your fresh coffee. All right.
Some of us do.
Oh, there you go.
I've done Melita for a long time.
There you go. Hinda is practically what Hinda does every Shabbos, and it's
Not every, but when I crave coffee, yeah.
wait.
Melita.
I need to pause for a second.
Yeah.
The all coffee beans are roasted.
Absolutely.
Yes,
They're all roasted.
yes.
When I go to the store, not that I do this, but if you go to the store and you go pick up those, you go to Trader Joe's, they have those, coffee beans that you can,
Yeah.
that's all roasted.
All roasted.
If you look at the labels, it'll say medium roast, dark roast. I mean, there are degrees of roasting, but they're all roasted.
Uh-huh.
They're not raw beans.
The difference between dark roast and medium roast is
It's just
it
the
like-
length of time it's been roasted, that's all.
so it's like
But they're all
Nizbashal
roasted.
or it's like Machal Ben Drusai for coffee.
No.
Okay, I got it. All right, interesting. So I mean, look, we will talk about the idea that when we get to this topic about things that are roasted are not cooked, and cooking after roasting is a little bit of an issue. But if you're making your coffee, keep drinking your coffee. You have no problem. Okay. All right, let's finish the Mishnah Berurah's comments here. So, and if in a Kli Rishon, it's cool. Let's say in the pot where it cooked, the soup, you have a small pot of soup and you cooked it, and then you left it out for a while. Now it's basically, it's cooled down. So that it's not even hot enough that you could put your hand there and go, it's too hot, you could feel like your hand might get burned. Then you could also do hatmana at that point. But he throws in there if there's a great need. Which he didn't throw in before. I guess there's a little bit of a discomfort with doing hatmana in a kli rishon, even though it's cooled down. He doesn't like it, so he only throws in bimkom hatzorech if you need it. The other one, he didn't say that. And I don't think you have to be machmir to say only it's become bimkom tzarech. The Shulchan Aruch said if you move it from one pot to the other and you want to do hatmana, so by all means do hatmana. The last point I was saying is that if you do hatmana in the kli rishon after it's cooled down all the way, so you could do it. He just says do it only b'mkom hatzorech when there's a need, which is like first of all, I know it's a ridiculous line because you never do anything you don't need to do. Usually, when it comes to food, you don't just do things for the fun of it. But when you throw in a line like that, you're saying do it only if you really need it. Otherwise, just let it go. But that's because it was maybe in a kli rishon, and there's a little bit of a discomfort with doing this in a kli rishon. If it's moved to a kli sheni, I don't think you need to be machmir. If you do this, right? Let's say you take you have a soup. You make a big pot of soup, and then you move some of it to a kli sheni that you're going to serve that night, and you want to do hatmana and keep that warm. And by all means, you don't need to worry, even though the soup is very hot. I don't think you need to be only b'makom hatzorech, when it's a great need. I think that's fine. I think that's explicit in the Shulchan Aruch. I don't think you need to be more machmir than anybody we've read on this page. So okay, good. Let's go back now to let's keep going. Chaf tes. You move it from one pot to the other pot. Actually, look, you just made my point. Actually, when you pour it to the other pot, there's no nafkamina, there's no practical implication or difference. If you did this in order to cool the food down, let's say the soup down, that's why you moved it from a kli rishon to a kli sheni, or bistama le'ez siba. Oh, you know what? It's easier to serve everybody at the table if I move it from a big pot to a smaller pot, and I can carry that smaller pot to the table and serve everyone soup. I didn't have any kavanah to cool it down. No matter what the reason that I moved the food, if you move the food, you're allowed to do hatmana in the second pot.
Even if you move the food so that it will heat more effectively? I have two pots. The first one is very hot, and I serve my first course in that. The second one's not so hot. So I put the second one into the first one, which now becomes the kli sheni for my second course. But it's hotter, so it warms it.
You can do hatmana to the first cup.
if the first thing is fully cooked,
Mhm.
if that before you move it to the hotter pot, then yes, and that's what we said in the previous sip, right? Even bein sharishon cham yoser me'asheni, bein shasheni yoser cham yarishon. So here you're emptying the contents into a klisheni, even though the klisheni is still hot. I think it's permissible. Yeah.
No, I think
Yeah.
we just learned it, that if you move it from klisheni.
Yeah, even though the klisheni is hot. So Steve has a very clever, heter here, which will be very effective. I'm not even saying that tongue in cheek. I think it's a very effective heter, which is that you empty the contents of pot A, you serve them. Now pot A is very hot. You take pot B, which is not as hot. You move contents from pot B to pot A. You could do hatmana in a situation where it's more effective. The heat is there. It'll be warmer when you serve it. I don't think it's going to cook the food, but it'll certainly keep it warmer. Yeah, it's permissible. Yeah, I don't see that's a problem. Okay,
Talking about the act of hatmana, not the effect of hatmana.
right. Exactly. That's exactly where the gzera was made, on the act, not the effect of it. Which is a funny thing, but okay, that's where the gzera was made. Lamed b'davar she'eno mosif hevel. So the b'davar hamosif hevel afilu tzonen gamur asu l'chepekamen. Right. Once we're talking about davar hamosif hevel, forget it. Even if the food is cold, nothing to talk about. The whole thing falls apart. This line of heter that we've worked on today is only if it's a davar she'ena mosif. Vav in the Shulchan Aruch says muter lahatmin b'Shabbos davar tzonim b'davar she'ena mosif hevel kadei shelo yitztarin beyoser o kadei shetafik tzinaso b'davar hamosif hevel afilu lahatmin tzonim gamor afilu mi'ba'od yom namios. So what happens here? So it is permissible to do hatmana on Shabbos. Shabbos davar, something that is cold. So this is kind of Steve's case from a moment ago. Davar she'eno mosif hevel, in a situation where it's eno mosif hevel, kedei shelo yitztanen biyosef, so it doesn't cool down more. So Steve had a little bit of a hotter pot in this example, which is not a kli rishon. Great. Oh, kedei shetafik tzinaso. Or let's say you take something out of the refrigerator, you want to, not warm up, but you want to take tafik, so it's like take out the chill. That's what it's saying. You want to remove the chill, so you take it, you put the pot in a down blanket, and I don't know if that'll actually help, by the way, because a down blanket all it does is it retains what's there. So if it's cold, I don't know, maybe that may actually more effectively keep it cool. The bottom line is you're allowed to do these things in order to remove the chill or to the things that don't cool down further. Not a problem at all. Right? If it's cold, no problem. Do hatmana from today to tomorrow, whatever you want to do. But again, if it's adding heat, even if it's fully cold, it's sonen gamor. This thing is from the freezer. It's so cold. Even if you did it from Friday afternoon, it's us. I say, well, that's really a problem. Like then you're really making an effective change here. But again, hatmana is really all about insulation. So why would you do hatmana on an ice cream pint? On an ice cream. You take a Edie's ice cream pint. Why are you doing hatmana? It doesn't make any sense. No one would do hatmana on that. Even if it's something that's very cold, it's not really, you're not retaining heat. Okay, but if it's davar hamosif hevel, well, it's still a problem. We never allow any situation of davar hamosif hevel, even if it's fully cold. Take a look at Mishnah Berurah, and then we'll stop. Lamed Aleph, Lamed Beis. Lamed Aleph says mutar lahatin va'afilu adam chashuv shari. Even an adam chashuv, someone who's a very important person, has to can engage in this heter of something that's cold. Now you say, oh, why is an adam chashuv different? So not infrequently, adam chashuv shani. Sometimes the Gemara will say, oh, an adam chashuv is different because people are watching them, people are looking at them, they see they're doing hatmana, and so therefore they're held to a higher standard. But here, no higher standard. This is it's cold. Cold is cold, and it's davar she'ena mosif hevel. Lay off the guy. The rabbi wants to be a regular guy. Why I have to hold the rabbi to a different standard. Okay. Lamed Beis. Davar tzonin, kagon mayim. Let's say you have cold water. O tav shel tachas kar muksasa. So you have some pot, and you want to put it underneath pillows and cushions. No problem. It's not a problem, even though it will take away some of the chill, or might say, but if that's really true, I'm not even sure that really will take away the chill. I don't know. Maybe it does. But bottom line, that's going to be permissible. No, sorry, no. This is if it's davar. Oh no, that's correct. Yeah, that's where I lost my spot here. Lamed Beis goes back to which point? Yeah, that's if it's taking. Yeah, that's fine. It's cold water. What do we care? It's room cuts to room temperature. Not a problem at all. We'll stop here. The end of Siv Vav. We'll continue with Siv Zayin next time, which will introduce. That's where the Rama gets into a very, very, very lenient position about Hatmana. In terms of if it's already happened, can you consume the food? We made mention of this in a previous shiur. So we'll continue with that next time. And Zayin Ches is all we have left here, but it'll take us probably a couple more sessions. All right, we'll stop here. People are around next Tuesday morning. I don't see why we shouldn't learn. I know it's not exactly a busy time for anyone, right?
Oh,
Hinda votes no. And people are here, or people are traveling. I don't know if you're here.
Yeah.
here, but extremely busy.
We'll meet. No reason not to meet then. All right.